Russian nuclear arms control has become a hostage to the conflict in Ukraine. Here's why it's so dangerous. Why Moscow's and Washington's positions on how to manage atomic weapons are fraught with mistrust, unpredictability, and volatility. By Elena Chernenko, special correspondent at the Kommersant daily newspaper in Moscow. During the Cold War, Moscow and Washington managed to agree on arms control regardless of the degree of their involvement in regional conflicts, whether in Europe or in Afghanistan. In the case of Ukraine, the situation is different. One of the side effects of the deployment of Russian troops in the country has been the freezing of these negotiations between Russia and the US. The process of drawing up new agreements in this field, launched in 2021, has been stopped. The last of the existing bilateral treaties on strategic offensive arms is facing serious problems. In the meantime, the breakdown of arms control will lead to more mistrust, unpredictability, and instability. A step forward. In the area of strategic stability, 2022 started well overall. On January 26, the US responded to security demands issued by Russia, and although Washington refused to provide guarantees that Ukraine would not join NATO or to withdraw the bloc's forces to 1997 positions, in the area of strategic stability the US was clearly in favor of compromise. The American response indicated that they were willing to negotiate on a number of topics that Russia had been unsuccessfully pushing for over the previous few years. The most prominent example, Moscow's 2019 proposal for a moratorium on the deployment of land-based intermediate-range and shorter-range missiles in Europe. Before last January, the US and its NATO allies had publicly labeled the Russian initiative as unacceptable and untrustworthy. However, Washington's response to Moscow's demands explicitly stated that the Americans had agreed to negotiate on the issue. Moreover, the letter specified that the US was ready to discuss a transparency mechanism with Russia to verify the absence of Tomahawk cruise missiles at Aegis Ashore sites in Romania and Poland, provided that Moscow provided reciprocal transparency conditions for 2 selected land-based missile bases on its territory. Earlier, the Russian side itself had proposed similar verification measures, but Moscow's suggestion was only listened to against the background of its December 2021 ultimatum on Ukraine and its concentration of troops on the Ukrainian border. In its January response, the US also indicated a willingness to explore the possibility of expanding the exercise notification regime and measures to reduce nuclear danger, including with regard to strategic atomic weapons carrying bomber aircraft. In addition, the message from Washington indicated a willingness on the US side to discuss with Russia differences on conventional arms control and additional measures to prevent dangerous incidents at sea and in the air. Although Russian officials had described these US proposals as secondary to Russia's central demands for NATO non-proliferation and the withdrawal of the bloc's infrastructure in Central and Eastern Europe, many observers had the impression that Moscow was simply bargaining. Not in a particularly elegant way, but very effectively, as it looked to strengthen its negotiating position. All the more so since Russian officials had assured the world that no invasion of Ukraine was planned, and the Russian Foreign Ministry had expressed the hope, as early as mid-February, that together Russia and NATO member states could achieve a good result across the whole package of issues. The feeling that Russia wouldn't try to resolve the Ukrainian issue by force and the belief that arms control was a foreign policy priority for Moscow gave rise to cautious optimism. It seemed that the troops were about to be withdrawn as promised and an intensive negotiation process was about to begin between the two powers. The basis for this belief already existed. During their meeting in Geneva in June 2021, Presidents Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden had launched a dialogue on strategic stability aimed at working out new bilateral agreements to replace the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START, which expires in 2026. As part of this process, the two delegations managed to hold 2 rounds of face-to-face talks. The results were modest but encouraging. And 2 backwards. However, following Moscow's recognition of the independence of the Donbass and Lugansk People's Republics, and then the deployment of Russian troops to Ukraine, those hopes were dashed. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who had planned to meet his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Geneva on February 24, said that he no longer saw the point. The US quickly suspended its participation in a bilateral strategic stability dialogue. The positive aspects of the December-February correspondence were no longer mentioned. Against the backdrop of the hostilities in Ukraine, everything faded into the background.